Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second recording, our second teaching on the Soul Foundation 2025. Very happy to have John Shartle. John is kind of our expert and has done such a wonderful job in last week's presentation. You can view it if you have not by simply going back to our website, Cosmic Citizens Committee Reports and Videos. It'll be the first session last week, the 16th. Tonight will be our second session, and it too is being recorded. In the handouts, we're going to be on day 2, the morning, developing a response. And with that, John, let me turn it over to you, and again, we're very thankful for your presence here this evening. John?
Thank you, Vince. And just a couple of things before we get started. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you that are here tonight and have shown interest in this topic. And again, Vince, thank you for your sponsorship all the way through. And I think we would all agree that Vince looks good in his soul t-shirt. And there we go. There we go. I do have a few things to say before we get into the second part of this. I just think it's important. I've been reflecting since last week on what we covered last week. And again, I'm grateful everybody was there. And in the interim, I've had some contact with some folks in Now Creations of various types. And I'm really grateful for that. It shows me that you're interested, and I just like getting a little feedback. So as we begin tonight, I wanted to start with a few things. I have a little script here. I work better from a script, so I'm just gonna start with the script and say, before we begin this presentation, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something important. Since last week's session on the Soul Symposium 2025, and particularly in response to my recommendation that folks check out the new documentary, The Age of Disclosure, I've received several thoughtful emails and messages expressing ideas, curiosity, and different perspectives on this. Some have suggested the film might have an agenda. Others are wrestling how to come to terms with the different voices that are in the movie and some of the intelligence figures. And I think that's worth fleshing out. I do want to say right now, the movie is out. It came out on the 21st. I have seen, in fact, I bought it. I bought the movie. I've been anticipating the movie since March when I first heard that it had been previewed. And in fact, I will say that the movie takes into account a number of different perspectives. It does start with a national security point of view, and some may take issue with that. But I think it's a valid part of the conversation. And that really leads me into my comments here. I do want to say, I think everybody should see it. I think it's a very important movie. I know, John, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I may ask you to weigh in just a minute if your thoughts on it. But I just thought it was tremendous. So if you have the opportunity to see it, it's on Amazon Prime. It costs, I think, $18 to rent it, which is a little high, I know. And for $20 or $25, you can buy it. I bought it. But at any rate, there is a cost associated, but I think it's money well spent. But with that in mind, I do want to say a few things before we get into the nuts and bolts of the Soul Symposium. The phenomenon, whatever it is, doesn't come with a user's manual. There are a million different voices related to this topic. Some people want to look at it as a topic that is all light and love. Some think that it's a hostile invasion of aliens. Some think it's a purely consciousness-based experience. Some think that it's a military operation. Some would say it's technology, just nuts and bolts. And our friend Jacques Vallée that we talked about last week would say that it is symbolic, archetypal, and multidimensional. And I think that it may be all of those things and many more things. This is something that I think far exceeds our understanding. And I think that's part of the reason I find it so fascinating. It is not something that can be neatly tucked into one box, good or bad, yes or no, this or that. It is many things. And I think it's probably more things than we even know. So what I would say as we enter this conversation, and for any of you that choose to look further into this, or maybe you already do, I'm not preaching to you because I certainly don't have a lock on all the information, but I would say your best tool, your best friend in this is discernment. There are a lot of voices. There are a lot of people who have a lot of things to say. And I was just talking to a friend of mine today, a new friend actually, And we discussed the real importance of discernment in all things, but particularly with this topic, because there are lots of people out there who claim they know, and I don't think anybody really knows what we're dealing with. What we know is that we're dealing with a great big mystery, and I think that's about as far as it goes. And we get to see little elements of it. But I don't think you can interpret the whole thing from little glimpses that we get. So I think it's a lot of things. I would say a couple of things from my perspective, and I don't mean anything negative from what I'm about to say. You know, many people want the government to tell us what's going on. I don't trust the government to tell us what's going on, but I do think the government has things to say. I think the government has information, and I think that they may have an agenda, but I think they have things to say about this that we may want to listen to. Maybe not all of it, but some of it for sure. The one thing they're not saying anymore is that this isn't real. Everybody is in agreement that this is a real thing. And I think that is why I am so fond of the Soul Foundation and what they're doing. You know, they're really trying to bring all the voices into this. And I really admire them for doing that. It's a 2-day conference, so there's just not the possibility of hearing everyone. But over the course of time, I think they're trying to allow for many, many voices to be heard. So I would just say, again, I want to just put a plug in there for in your own search on this topic, be able to be open to many voices. I would say hold on loosely to information, be able to shift based on new information, and don't think that any one thing is solid. I certainly haven't, and I've been looking at this for a long time, and I know things change for me all the time. So I really just wanted to preface with that, and I did also want to say, if you have the chance, you know, you're going to have a good time watching The Age of Disclosure. You'll probably learn a few things, and I guarantee you'll come out with an opinion at the end of the movie, because it's a really, I think it's very well done. And again,
John, 1 second too on that. Let me just say, if anyone does find that financially difficult, if you just let me know, we'll certainly with Now Creations take care of any costs for you.
That's very generous of you, Vince. Thank you for that. But John, if you don't mind, you know, may I put you on the spot and ask you, because I know you and I have chatted a little bit, and you said you saw the movie too. Would you care to weigh in on that for just a moment?
Absolutely. Yes. It's about an hour and 40 minutes, 49 minutes maybe. And I too had a choice to rent it or buy it, and I bought it. I just knew there would be parts of it that I would want to watch again. And the part I want to watch again is the last 45 minutes. So when you said there was lots of voices and things speak to you, that really spoke to me the last 45 minutes. I won't go into, but wow. And it connects with things that we talk about in our classes. That's what I found. I mean, there's a lot of factual, and there's the sightings, and there's so many different angles to this. But the last 30, 40 minutes, I have never heard the voices talking about in a bigger picture of what's going on. So it was terrific. It was terrific. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Thank you for that. So having said that, Vince, did you want to weigh in on that at all before we get started on day 2?
No, I'm ready to go with day 2.
All
John.
right.
Thank you very kindly. Excuse me, Tina, I think, has a comment.
Tina?
Yes, I'd like to comment that I did also buy the movie, The Age of Disclosure. No, I'm not buy it. We rented it for 48 hours. I didn't see the option to buy it, or I certainly would have done that for that small amount more. But it was really educational. I actually learned a lot about how long our government has been studying this and keeping it under wraps because they did not know what to say about it. And there have been people benefiting from it financially. I guess companies, contractors have, specific contractors have been quietly handling much of what is reviewed and, looked at of remains. it's unknown whether there's actual crashes because, if they're so highly advanced, why are they crashing? Or if they planned to leave behind something. So many interesting points made, but my takeaway on it was two things. One is that the one gentleman who spoke pointed out that, they've been observing us and studying us for a long, long time, at least since the 40s, is my understanding. And we are, in a lot of ways, getting to be a more violent species all the time. And so I'm wondering if they are seeing us as some sort of a threat as we get more technology and more ability to bring problems, to the earth. The other
We lost you, Tina. She's back on again. Tina, unmute. I think Tina went off for a moment, and I think you're back on, Tina. We need you to unmute, though. Let's just take a second.
I'm sorry, I don't know
That's
what
okay.
happened there. I wasn't able to unmute or bring my picture back for a moment, so I don't know what happened. But I don't want to talk too long. I'll just say that I feel like with all the years we've been being observed by this species, but whoever they are, that they aren't violent toward us, so they'd have done away with us a long time ago. I think we're just being studied and observed, and so I found some peace in that. But yeah, I'm sorry, my computer went off here while I was speaking, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. John,
Thank you,
go
Tina.
ahead.
Thanks. Thank you, Tina. All great points. And I think some of the takeaways from the movie as well. So day 2 of the Soul Foundation Symposium in Italy. We started off in the morning with a guy named Dr. Christian Peters. He's a professor at the International Graduate School of Social Sciences in Bremen, Germany. And he was one of my favorite presentations. I just thought this guy had a way of delivering information that was calm, cool, collected, factual. And the essence of his point, the essence of his presentation was that this is no longer a nuts and bolts issue. There were several people who kind of talked about this idea, but his perspective was that we really need to start reshaping culture to integrate this idea so that people, at some point we need to stop asking, is this real? We need to stop treating it as though it's some weird idea and just integrate it into our day-to-day life. That's easier said than done, I suppose, but I think he's doing really good research and really good work from a social sciences perspective to reach out and coordinate with the hard natural sciences too. This isn't one stream or the other. It's all of it. But certainly this needs to be integrated into culture, just like we're doing right now, to be honest with you. This is a cultural event, actually, when you think about it, because many of us several years ago would never have dreamed we'd be sitting on a Sunday night talking about UAP and the phenomenon, but here we are. So I think what he recommends is kind of what we're already doing. So I really enjoyed his presentation. And I will mention that I have just started listening to one of my podcasts that I listen to, and I may have mentioned this last week. It's called That UFO Podcast. It's a guy from Scotland named Andy, and he gets great guests on. And Dr. Peters is one of his guests on one of his most recent shows. So if you're a podcast person, I would encourage you, go back and find this podcast. I'll be happy to send you an email about it or a text if you want to do it offline. But it's called That UFO Podcast, and he's on it, and he did a great job. So it was a great presentation.
Excuse me, John. I'm going to
Yes.
suggest too that the very last line, the last sentence you put in your review, I thought was very helpful for all of us under Dr. Peters, where it says his message was clear. This is no longer just a physics or an aerospace issue. It is sociological, political, and cultural. I thought your summary was excellent.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, that's in the written report that I did.
Yes, correct.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was his message. This is, and I think, again, it speaks to my opening comments, and that this is a topic that touches on everything. And the more we start taking it out of singular categories and start integrating it, I think the more comprehensive our conversation about this will be. So then after Dr. Peters, we moved on to Dr. Fabio De Masi, and he is a former member of the German Parliament and also the European Parliament. Fun fact, I didn't know there was a European Parliament till I went to the Soul Foundation, but there is. And he was a really smart guy too. Again, this conference took place in Italy, in Europe, for a reason. And that is to sort of take it out of the mainstreaming, this is strictly an American conversation, and basically broaden the conversation. And I think expose people on the panel and in the audience to the fact that there are really bright people outside the United States of America who have some pretty good ideas about this. And he did. He was, very politically articulate and talked about the connection that the Europeans could be making with, the Americans on a number of different levels, from, military to, sociological to political. Let's not forget, and I will hearken this back to what Carl Nell said, if we remember him from last week. Carl Nell's whole thing is that this is as much a political conversation as anything. And we are subject to the political, we're subject to whatever our political leadership is inclined to be doing, and they all have an imperative. So his thought was, his message was, we need to really start integrating the voices of Europe, of the United States, and I think by extension, you could also say of South America and of Africa, because this event, this situation reaches those places as well. So I enjoyed his presentation, and as a side note, he mentioned that his interest in this whole conversation started with David Grush, and just to remind you who David Grush is. He's kind of showing up again around this movie, The Age of Disclosure, because David Grush really kind of lit a fire under this conversation a few years ago when he came forward as a whistleblower and then testified before Congress under oath that he is aware of programs that have retrieved crashes, bodies, and that they're being studied by the United States government. So I have a lot of respect for David Grush, and I really appreciated that he mentioned David in his presentation.
Excuse me, John. Can I add one other thing too? I thought it was interesting that Fabio mentioned David Grush, and especially understanding that Fabio, is part of the German Parliament and the European Parliament, and that David Grush was an inspiration to him.
Yes.
That's enormously significant.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes perhaps that can filter down to each one of us, just sharing what we know about these things without over-exaggerating, and yet sometimes not being silent, at least opening up possibilities and doors. So kudos to David Grush and the experience of his whistleblowing out on others as well. Thank you, John. Go ahead.
Right. That's a great message, Vince. You don't know who you're going to touch. When you decide to be courageous, you just don't know who you're going to touch. That you're a guy in the United States having an impact on some, politician in Europe. So yes, I concur with that as well. Yes. Moving on to the day, this too was one of my favorite. I had about 4 that I really loved, and all of them were good. Some of them just really stood out to me. We heard from a guy named Dr. Michael Bolander, and he's basically a lawyer. He's the chair of a department of law at Durham University in the UK, and his specialty is this very strange thing. It's called global law and SETI policy. If you don't know what SETI is, it's the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. So in the UK, there is an entire department dedicated to the law and legality of connection of the connection between humans and extraterrestrials or aliens or extra dimensionals. He raised a bunch of really important points, which is, we had this vision. He started with, we had this vision of, what the movies have shown us of the aliens coming down and, there's this meeting and all this, but we don't really have a framework for that. We don't understand. Think about it. We don't have any sense of what whoever they are, what their sense of morality is. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just, we don't know, if these beings are real, what shapes them? Do they have a sense of love? Do they have a sense of anger? Do they have, what makes them run? And, when you have two conscious entities showing up and meeting, how do we know we're going to be able to speak the same language, not only verbally, if that's even possible, but morally and ethically? And he used a number of examples, I will say, I don't think these examples were used to be scary or dark, just to be realistic. But for example, if we are a consciousness and we have a certain ethics in the way we treat other creatures on Earth, well, what about something else that shows up and has a different set of ethics than we do about how they treat us, assuming they have a higher technology or a higher intelligence? We just don't know. So it was for me, I call these things thought experiments. It was a great thought experiment to consider that. How do you bridge that gap? And I guess I was really pleased to know that there's a whole department in the UK of lawyers that are actually thinking about this. And he's a very bright guy. And I just really appreciated his conversation, and it's really stuck with me since the conference. So I think for me, it's the way I think about movies. If I think about a movie 2 days after I've seen it, it was probably a pretty good movie. I've been really thinking about his presentation since the conference. And I will say also, he recently, just the other day, in fact, I think I sent it to you, Vince. He co-authored an article that is in a journal called Global Policy Review, I believe, called "Don't Look Up: Why It's Past Time for Serious Holistic Research into UAP." So this guy is no small shake. He's getting, he's written some really serious articles, and he's a serious thinker. And I really appreciated his presentation. Then we kind of closed out the morning, and we moved into the last, I will call it the last European-based, or the last European-centric presentation. Maura Mandrilla is actually a member of the Soul Foundation, and she again just did a presentation on the opportunity that Europe has to step up. I think the hidden message, if I'm reading the tea leaves on her message, was that right now, I don't think I'm saying anything terribly revelatory here. The American politics is kind of a wreck right now. I mean, people don't talk to each other, and it's something that we really need to work through. But at the moment, it's in troubled waters. And I think she was kind of rising to the challenge to say, hey, Europe, guess what? You have an opportunity here to become leaders in this conversation. And she did a really good job with it. She had a little trouble with her graphics at some point, but she really did close the morning out well and made a really solid point that this does not rely on the United States alone. There can be other leadership on this topic. So kudos to Maura.
I'm going to interrupt you, John, just for one more moment and say, I thought Maura was the kind of the sweetheart of the conference. She is such a pleasant person.
She is indeed.
Pretty sharp cookie, so pleasant and kind, and was very kind to acknowledge now creations personally when I was talking with her. But what a sweetheart.
Indeed. She's a kind person. I've dealt with her on a number of issues through emails and whatnot, and she's always been very, very helpful. A great face of soul, to be honest with you.
Truly.
So then we had another great lunch. And then when we came back, I was really pleased because I saw this gentleman speak last year at Soul, and he's on a number. He's actually in the movie The Age of Disclosure, and he's been around for a while. He is a retired one-star admiral. His name is Tim Gallaudet. I actually met him last year, took a couple of pictures, with him, and I was really pleased to be able to do that. It didn't have that chance this year, but basically his message, he's very direct. And I don't know if he's right, but he was certainly direct. He basically started off his presentation and said, anybody who's looking for quote unquote disclosure from the current administration, forget it. It's not going to happen. I don't know if he's right, but that's his perspective. And his reason is that, again, I'm going to try and be delicate, not to be political, but every political administration has their own agenda. And this agenda, this administration's priority is not putting any uncertainty out there. And this is a topic that certainly could create uncertainty. If you say, hey, yes, I'm here to certify that we are in contact with another intelligence, well, that can create uncertainty in certain circles. And his opinion, I'll keep it with him, was that is not their priority right now. But the alternative to that, and this was again something I didn't know, so a really good feature of going to the Soul Foundation Symposium, he highlighted, I don't know, maybe a dozen, maybe more organizations throughout the world that are already dealing with this issue in one framework or another. They're dealing with non-human intelligence, or scanning the skies or whatever. And his whole point, I think, was that we should consider having one of these organizations or a consortium of these organizations take on this mission of, call it disclosure, call it contact, whatever you want to call it, but having private organizations or non-governmental organizations take on this task. Because if we're going to wait for the government to tell us, we're probably going to wait forever. So I really appreciated his presentation, and he really marketed it as an opening for these organizations. Not just we should offload this, but this is an opportunity. And I think when you frame things as an opportunity, it takes on a much more appealing perspective. So I enjoyed seeing him, and I think he had a really good message for the group.
Let me just suggest, John, also that I certainly agree with you, a very well-spoken person. But he also mentioned among those 6 things, podcasts. Podcasts were very, very important for him. So, and I know that's something you personally do a lot of, John. And I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Thanks, Vince. Yes, and I appreciated that too, because sometimes, there are a billion podcasts out there. Anything you can think of, there's a podcast about it. And so again, I will just come back to the word of the day, which is discernment. There are, especially with regard to this topic, there are some really, what I consider to be great podcasts that do great interviews, do really substantial work. And then there are some garbage ones, there just are. I think that's something that we each have to work through, and what speaks to us. I mean, if you're ever interested in what I think are good podcasts, I'd be happy to let you know. I tend towards ones that, are a little more grounded, but that's not everybody's cup of tea. I know a few that are a little bit more, let's say, ethereal, and they're good too. But at any rate, this is an editorial here. I think we're moving out of a time where, we used to turn on the news at 6 o'clock, and that was the news of the day. And then we had the 24/7 news coverage. And now I think we're just moving out of that. I think that there is, I don't want to say a consensus, but I feel a personal shift among many people that I know, where they just don't even listen to what's called mainstream media for a variety of reasons. They get their news from, I'll just mention, like the Joe Rogan podcast, whether that's good or bad, that's for you to decide, or, the UFO podcast that I mentioned. But I think that we're moving into a territory right now where that's really where the information is. That's the information sphere. It's in podcast, where people can just talk about things. So that's an aside, but you're right. He mentioned that, and that is, I think, a really important part of where we're going to be taking this conversation going forward. Um, then we moved into some hard science. We had a presentation by an astrobiologist by the name of Jacob Hawk-Mizra, Dr. Jacob Hawk-Mizra, and he is doing work at the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science. And it was a very, I'll say, a very science-laden presentation that I had to really work at trying to follow some of the things that he was saying. But he did a really good job. He's just one of those big brain guys that can't help himself. You know, he was doing his best to deal with people like me, but I really had to pay attention to what he was saying. And one of the takeaways that I took from him, I think probably the most important takeaway is that while he personally has not seen anything that he believes is a marker of life, his job is to look for markers of life out in space, you know. And one of the things that he said, and I think this is brilliant, is that we may be looking with a human bias. We may be looking at space with an earth bias. And that is to say, the only life we know exists right here on this planet, you know, whether it's human life, bacterial life, whatever. And when you start looking out and you look at other planets, and we have rovers landing on Mars, they're looking for things that look similar to life on Earth. And maybe life out there looks nothing like life on Earth. So I really thought that was thought-provoking, you know, to think of things entirely differently. One of the things, this is a side note, by the way, I just saw this week that, and it really ties into his presentation. You know, back in the 70s, we sent landers to Mars. And I mean, think about that. 50 years ago, we sent landers to another planet. All right. I never get, that's never common to me. It's always amazing to me. And back then they did some samples. They did samples of material on Mars to see if there was any sign of bacterial life. And they didn't find any. They found weird stuff, but they said they didn't find bacterial life or markers of what was once bacterial life. Well, they're reconsidering that now. They're actually going back with new data, and they're looking at those samples that they 50 years ago said, yeah, this isn't anything. And they're thinking, well, maybe we missed something here. Maybe we are seeing some things here that look like they may be indicators of life. And for what it's worth, it was maybe 2 months ago. It got lost in the noise of government shutdowns and all this other stuff. But NASA came out and said, we have found stuff that we have no other explanation for, except that it was made by some kind of life form a long time ago. We can't say conclusively that it is, but we have no other explanation, is what they said. So I think, and this ties back to this gentleman's presentation, I really appreciated the fact that we're now starting to enter into this sort of more open-minded idea of what life might look like. And it might not look like us at all. You know, it might not look like us. It might not look like amoeba. You know, one of the things that's kind of come up in conversation right now is plasma, you know, living plasma out in space. And, you know, that's a new idea, but I mean, sure, I'm just glad people are thinking about it. So I appreciated his presentation. It was thought-provoking. And even though it was a little hard to follow at certain places, it was really well-timed, and it was really an important part of the symposium. Vince, any thoughts on that?
Thumbs up, John. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. The notion we have an earth bias.
We have an earth bias. That's right. I mean, and it wasn't a ding. I mean, he wasn't like, he was just like, hey, you know, when you have, this is all we know. So that's where we start. But I enjoyed his presentation, and I later on in the day, I had a chance just to walk by him and just tell him how much I appreciated his presentation. So then moving on, we moved into a kind of a different presentation by Dr. Anna Brady Estevez of the National Science Foundation, and Jonathan Berta, who is one of the sole co-founders. He is also an AI and tech entrepreneur. And this was one of those presentations that I think that there was a lot being said behind the words. You know, the actual words that were being spoken, there was more to the story. Essentially, what they were saying is, that AI, artificial intelligence, has reached the place where it can be a real valuable partner in exploring data that's being looked at related to non-human intelligence of all sorts, whether it's compiling stories of people who have had encounters, people who have had experiences, or whether it's compiling hard data of, stuff from space or from telescopes or whatever. AI has become more than a tool. It has become a partner in this study. And, so what that was the conversation. And so they were talking about all these different systems that can look at all these different things, how one needs speed, one needs accuracy, one needs the ability to look at a wide field of things. And the National Science Foundation, basically, she was there to say, look, we have money to fund these things. If you have a great idea, we have the tools, the resources, and money to help you get your project off the ground. And Jonathan, who again is one of the sole founders, was there to say he is a tech and an AI entrepreneur, and to say, bring your ideas to me, and basically I'll filter them to her, and let's have a conversation. But to me, and this is strictly to me, so I speak only for myself, I think that conversation was larger than just AI as a tool. Last year at Soul, AI was not even mentioned. I can't think of, I don't think it was mentioned at all. If so, it was in passing. And this year it came up in several different ways in several different presentations. And I think there's going to come a point where we're going to have to look at AI differently. I think the idea, if you just think of what AI is, it's right there in the name. When we talk about non-human intelligence and we talk about artificial intelligence, there's one common word there. And, I will leave that discussion for another time, but I have certain very specific thoughts about that. I think that this particular presentation was is the right word, harbinger of future conversations around this, because as we're looking for non-human intelligence, there is a form of it that we're already engaging with. So I'll leave it there. And I think that was kind of an underlying message of their presentation.
First of all, John, let me just say a good word, harbinger. It's a nice, good philosophical term too. But also, I noticed, and I was not one of them, but there was a long line of people after her presentation who seemingly were trying to make some contact with her, which means to me a lot of bright ideas looking for money.
Yeah.
Just thought that was pretty good idea there. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, and I will tell you, Vince, and I'll mention this to the group too. Through a series of events, there was a friend of ours, friend of Cheryl's and mine, at the conference, and she's very much into this idea of the connection between AI and UAP. And I'll just say this, Vince. She mentioned to me that she did have a nice conversation with them, and they're if she gives them a proposal, they're ready to, go forward. So, okay. So they have more money than I do, I guess, But anyway, yes, it was an interesting presentation. So, having said that, the day ended, and this was actually the last presentation that I was there for, that Vince and I were there for. Was a very interesting guy. His name is Roberto. Let me see here. Roberto Panatti. Is that right? Yes.
Roberto Panatti.
I was trying to say it right. Roberto Panatti. Very interesting gentleman. I'd say he's probably 80, 82 years old, something like that. Just really interesting guy. And this is there are so many tentacles to this conversation, but Roberto spent a good bit of his time talking about many of the things that he's done. He's connected with many governments, been involved in many investigations, but the one of most interest to the Soul Foundation, and to me in particular, is a case called the Magenta Italy crash of 1933. So basically, here's how this story goes. I can't do it with Roberto's Italian accent, but I will tell you the story. The story is basically this, that in 1933, around the area of Magenta, Italy, which was kind of near where we were, not too far from where we were at the conference, a vehicle of some sort crashed in the mountains of Magenta. And there was a recovery. They didn't know what it was. There are stories that say they thought it was German aircraft. Turns out it wasn't German aircraft. It was something completely unknown. So there was a lot of bureaucratic back and forth. Mussolini, who was the dictator at the time, El Duce, put out pretty strict guidance that you cannot talk about this. And so what Roberto had, which was really interesting, was all these telegrams and these statements and these official documents from Mussolini and Mussolini's government saying, you will not talk about this, getting updates, but you will not talk about this under the strictest, basically threatening death, I would say, probably. I don't think that was beyond Mussolini to threaten death. But the long and the short of it is this thing got stashed away. They didn't know what to do with it. And then World War II happened. So what wasn't said in this presentation, it was a really fascinating presentation, but what wasn't said in this presentation, but what I can tell you from our friend David Grush that we mentioned earlier, is that David Grush has gone on record in interviews saying that this crash was hidden away until the end of World War II. And after the war, now I'm not speculating, I'm telling you David Grush's words here. After the war, the United States intelligence services were aware of this vehicle being stashed away somewhere in Italy. Italy had fallen to the United States and the Allied powers. So our government worked through the Vatican to coordinate a recovery of this craft that crashed in 1933. So the implication is essentially that this crash, 1933, stayed in Italy for 12 years or so until 1945, 1946, at which time our intelligence services, being coordinated through Pope Pius, extracted this thing and brought it to the United States. Now, if that's not a crazy sounding story, I don't know what is, but I think it's probably true. That's the crazy thing about it. I really do think it's probably true. So, I mean, it just goes to show you, just when you think you've gotten as weird as you can get, this topic gets just a little stranger. But it was and Roberto did a great job of talking about it and a number of other things that he's involved in. And he's still going. This guy is not stopped. He talks a mile a minute and knows his stuff. And it was just delightful to see that somebody is doing this all over Europe and in the United States as well. Vince, did you have any thoughts on that? Or
I just agree with you, John. Well stated as you presented it.
Yeah. So that was the end of the day. That was the end of our action. That was actually my last presentation. And I believe Vince, that was yours as well. We didn't stay till Monday because we had to get back to the US, and that's a long journey, a delightful journey, but a long journey. So we missed Monday morning, two guys, Dylan Borland and Jeff Nucitelli. They both recently have testified before Congress, and they have very interesting stories, very interesting whistleblower stories. Jeff was an MP, military policeman at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And in the course of his duties, he physically saw craft, and he was physically responsible for investigating people who spotted craft. Apparently, Vandenberg in California has a number of sightings, and he has firsthand experience as well as experience with others who have seen these things, taken their reports, filed the police reports. He has the police reports. He has copies of the police reports. So he's become a very vocal person for disclosure, and he's a really good speaker. He testified at the last congressional hearing again, under oath. And I think that's important to remind people. When people, people can say a lot of things, but when they decide to raise their right hand and speak before Congress, that's a whole other set of conversations that you're having, with a lot of penalties that can go with that. So I think he's the real deal. I don't think, I know he's the real deal. And again, I had a chance to say hello to him too. Just a salt of the earth kind of guy, not trying to be anybody, not trying to have fame and fortune, just telling his story. And I enjoyed seeing him there. And then Dylan Borland is another whistleblower, also recently testified under same hearing, testified under oath, and had his own experiences. And frankly, in his experience, he had a number of unfortunate events that were precipitated, according to him, by the military. They didn't want him to talk about his experience, and they seemed pretty set on making that happen. So he has an interesting story. I would encourage you to go back. I think the link is right there in the report. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this topic, go back and watch that last hearing. Draw your own conclusions, because I think at the end of the day, that's what we all have to do. We have to be discerning and draw our own conclusions. So with that,
let me just ask something. With Jeff Nucitelli and my understanding too, with Jake Barber, were they not both retrieving crafts?
No, Jake was.
Jake was. What Nucitelli was? Did you say as well?
No, he was a police officer. He was a military police officer.
But he saw the crafts.
He saw craft. He actually physically saw a craft. But he and Jake Bart, they were two different. They weren't together at all.
Got it. Thank you, John.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Both in California, though, but they were not related to each other.
Yes.
So I want to take a pause there. And I know we're covering a lot of these presentations. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, comments at this point? I'm happy to answer them before we get into takeaways. Okay.
I should take a moment to give everyone a chance. Just take a good minute and just anything you want to formulate by way of a question. Give you a good solid minute. Nancy?
Hi, John. I just wanted to ask you if you would be willing to send me an email with those podcasts that you recommend, that you like. I'd be grateful for that.
I'd be happy to. I'll tell you what. Well, do you want to give me your email now, or do you want to just text me and give it to me?
It's whatever you want. I can say it or I can text it to you.
Sure. Sure. If you don't mind, I'll just write it down.
Okay, sure. It's my first and last name, which is Nancy, Nancy, Holland, HOLLAND, 51 at iCloud.com.
Sure, Nancy. I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you very much, John.
You bet. And I'll put it out to the group also. I know I have it I think it's on the report.
Okay.
My email is jts99362. It's right in the report. If anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free to do that. I'll happily respond.
I have an idea that many people might want those, John. So let me just ask, rather than doing any more right now, please contact John and he'll make sure you receive them. Okay.
Happy to do it.
Any other questions or comments? John Hoops?
I was going to save this for later, John, but I think it maybe fits right now. And I'm curious, because of all the write-up that you've written, I looked up some of the speakers to get a little flavor, and that led me to other videos and other sites that I found pretty interesting. There were two that really stuck out, and I'm just curious if you are familiar with these. The one is called Quantum Consciousness and the Origin of Life by Stuart Hameroff, and it's about 13 minutes and 58 seconds. And it is really interesting. It makes me think of, Vince, the consciousness, where it's located in the body, and soul, spirit, and source. But there, when you talked about this scientist who is, they're always searching for this physical object. It was so interesting. I'll just give you a quick snapshot. He feels that consciousness lies in these neurons in the brain. And so he was a anesthesiologist. And however that works, they're good at it. They can put us out for 2 seconds, 2 minutes, 6 hours. But he felt that this consciousness is in plants, animals, and people. So he did just one little aspect of this was a study they did of a Venus flytrap, a plant that when a bug goes in there, clamps down on it. And so they put this Venus flytrap plant inside a container and then did the anesthesiology. They put the gas in it. And son of a gun, when they put something in there, it did not close. It was unconscious. It's a really interesting presentation. Quantum.
Excuse me, John. Rudolf Steiner would probably call that the etheric body in every animated body.
I see.
Just throwing it in.
Yeah.
You would call it the etheric body, which is in every animated body. Just sharing the idea with you.
I think it's short, 13 minutes and 58 seconds. I found it really fascinating. From one of the speakers you had mentioned, I couldn't tell you. And the other one, John, that I found when you talked about the fellow looking for markers of life, Dr. Jacob Hag Mizra. There's a video out called Osiris Rex. And this was another one. It's OSIRIS hyphen capital R, capital E, and a little x, Osiris Rex. It's an acronym for a pretty scientific. And it's called To Bennu and Back, BENNU. It was an asteroid that I didn't even know this had been taken place, where it's a 7 to 10 year project where they built this probe to fly out to this asteroid, take a sample of it, and bring it back to Earth. It's a beautifully done documentary. But they found amino acids, some really basic building blocks of our kind of life that was there millions of years ago. So, I mean, this is real, and that's just a little different look at what's going on. But I found those two really, really interesting.
Yeah, John, I tell you, like, this is, I said this last week, and I appreciate you bringing these forward. When you start drilling down into this and you realize how crazy, I mean, and I say that in the most profound way, like there's so much out there. The more you know, the more you know you don't know.
Yeah.
And when you start talking about quantum anything, quantum consciousness, I mean, it is in my, and again, this is an aside from the Soul Foundation, so maybe this is a conversation for another testimonial, but it's my belief that when you start getting into the quantum level of things, that is where science and spirituality meet. That's just it. I mean, when you start talking about quantum entanglement, how a molecule on Earth can be affected immediately by a molecule on Mars. I mean, it's mind blowing. And I think it's just a testament to the fact that there's a much larger story to our humanity.
Yes, and
well.
I'd like to go back to something in the movie, and Tina's comment reminded me of it. Near the end, they were talking about this bubble effect. That was really interesting, how there was space-time inside the bubble and our space-time, which is outside the bubble. So there's this quantum physics. This fellow spoke, that's the part I want to listen to again, about these objects that we see are in this quantum bubble and how they ride the wave. That was really interesting. That was one of the parts that I had never heard of before in the age of disclosure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's again, I could talk
we're
about
ready to go to our takeaways, John.
What's that?
Sorry.
I think we're ready for our takeaways.
Okay. We'll talk about takeaways. So there were, there were a lot of takeaways. I mean, I could have written a book on my takeaways, but for purposes of this meeting and brevity, I just put down 5. And the first one, as I said, I've already talked about this, but this is not just an American issue. This is a global issue. It's not just a global issue, in my opinion. This is a galactic issue. We have a group in Now Creations that we call the Cosmic Citizens Committee, and it's not called the Ohio Citizens Committee or the World Citizens Committee. It's the Cosmic Citizens, because I really do believe we are cosmic citizens. And I think that Soul Foundation believes that too. And, this topic is larger than just the United States. That was one of the big things. That was the reason we were in Europe in the first place. And I think that came through loud and clear through the many presentations, all of which were terrific. So, the more we can dialogue with other countries, the more we can combine our resources, the more we can get on the same page with this, I think the better chance we have of coming to some fundamental idea of what we're talking about, at least some piece of what we're talking about. So that was one of my takeaways.
John, may I suggest, I thought your second paragraph under takeaways was very relevant. Many nations are conducting UAP research alongside each other. And then the following sentence, the symposium underscored the need for these efforts to converge. International dialogue, shared data, and collective analyses are no longer luxuries, they are necessities. I thought what that really focused in on was the need of an international or a couple of international organizations. And very important to have a coordinating group on an international basis. I know there are a couple of groups that were mentioned. ICER was one of those groups, and you probably have the acronym for John more so than I, and also the Astronomical Society. You know it better than I. But I thought about a highlight of the presentation was a movement towards an international non-governmental body. How that's going to take shape, I don't know, but I thought that was a very significant takeaway. John and I have submitted some of our recommendations to the Soul Foundation, and one of which was precisely this one, a real need for dialogue on an international organization that would be the coordinating group for all of this information. A huge thing going forward, but it seemed like many speakers addressed that issue. Go back to you, John.
Yeah, and I think, my takeaway, I think one of the underlying themes of this very point is that I think the Soul Foundation is going to play an important role in that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they're going to become the group that does this, or if they're going to be the one that sort of coordinate the group that does do it. But they're very well suited to do it. The level of professionalism and brain power in this organization is really just astonishing. So I think they're just really ready to sort of take the lead on this, and they're visionary too. They're not bureaucratic. I think they're really outside the box thinkers. And so I think they're well suited to take on that role. Excuse me. So yeah, moving on to the second takeaway is the phenomenon is much more complex than once imagined. We're moving, and this has been going on for a while. I think it's just we're at a new stage of this. We're moving beyond there's lights in the sky, there's extraterrestrial craft. We're starting to talk about larger things. We're starting to talk about, in a meaningful way in this conversation, about consciousness. And even the word spirituality and metaphysics is coming into the conversation. Jake Barber, who, again, I'll just recall from last week, Jake Barber is a helicopter pilot. He's the last guy in the world that you would, at least in my world, that I would think of talking about being, infused with a feminine spirit and being moved by that. But that's the experience that he had, So I think we're just moving this out of the nuts and bolts box into a much larger, this is a lot of things. With Diana Pasulka, as I mentioned there, she was talking about this in a very spiritual terms, that maybe apparitions and things that people interpret as spiritual events are some kind of a contact event with the phenomenon. Because again, as I said at the beginning, we don't know what the phenomenon is. I think it's a lot of things. Actually, what I mean to say is, and this is going to be confusing, I think it's just one thing that manifests in a lot of different ways. So, I think the more ways we can look at this, from the many different lenses, the better. I think it serves us well. And it, we'll get to my favorite quote here in just a few minutes, but I think this speaks to my favorite quote. We just need to open our eyes a little bit more, be a little bit more willing to look at things in ways that we just haven't before. And I think my takeaway was that they're really trying to do that. They're really trying to expand the lens on how we address this issue. I appreciated this year in particular, and again, it's unfortunate that we weren't there, but the idea of experiencers, people who have had direct contact with UFOs or UAP or things that resemble that, have not really been included in this conversation by the Soul Foundation until this year. And they did that. Now, it was the presentation that Vince and I didn't make it to, but I think next year, when they have this conference, that's going to be a larger segment of the conversation, much less about, nuts and bolts and crafts and telescopes. It's going to be about experiences, I feel. So that's the direction I think we're going.
Let me suggest, John, also a second thing that John and I suggested to the Soul Foundation is that the most anomalous experience of anything, I should say, the most anomalous experience of anything is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that John and I have represented now creations well in these two major areas, in addition to the other things that we're submitting. Again, John did a beautiful job of presenting the information, but I think consciousness is such an anomalous phenomenon itself. Just part of a larger picture, as you said, John, very nicely. Just wanted to add that, John. Go ahead, John.
Vince, I want to just, I just want to tag on to something, and this is part of a conversation you and I touched on briefly during our trip, is that this is a conversation that is, I think it's worth mentioning this. This is a conversation that is expanding well beyond the Soul Foundation in many different ways. And one thing, I'm not here to recommend books by any means, but I think it's very interesting. A book that I did read recently is a book by Dan Brown called Secret of Secrets, which, again, I'm not here to promote Dan Brown books or even say that they're good literature, but I will say it's interesting that the book is about consciousness, and it's about consciousness studies, and not UAP in particular, but just how consciousness touches everything. And, again, I'm not here to recommend his book, but he did a lot of research into the book. I sort of read the backstory on the book. He did a lot of research on it, and everything that he talks about in the book, including organizations that I'm familiar with, like ions, noetic sciences, he cites them and studies that they've done. So this is a conversation that's expanding. That's really my only point. And I don't want to beat that up too much, but I just want to say it's a larger conversation, and it's an evolving conversation. Ooh, the voice is going here. It's an evolving conversation. Moving on. I already touched on this, but I think it's worth mentioning again. Artificial intelligence is emerging as both a tool and a topic. I'm just going to read this because I thought about it, how I wanted to phrase it. This year, artificial intelligence was no longer peripheral to the conversation. It was integral. Whether as an aid to research or a possible form of NHI in its own right, AI's significance is growing rapidly within this discussion. Its emergence reframes how we gather information, analyze data, and possibly even conceptualize the meaning of non-human intelligence. And I speak only for myself on this, but I really see this as an emerging area of conversation and philosophy. I think this is something we're going to have to grapple with, not just with artificial intelligence, but what's on the horizon right now is this thing called artificial general intelligence, which is, if you've ever dealt with ChatGPT, it's like ChatGPT on steroids. It's like ChatGPT. I did some research on this. If you've ever dealt with ChatGPT, which is in and of itself amazing, it is about 1 million times more powerful than the ChatGPT that exists right now, and it's effectively waiting to happen tomorrow. So I think we're going to have to sort of reframe this conversation about what we're dealing with here, because if we don't, it's going to reframe the conversation for us. That's just how I feel. Moving on, this goes back to Dr. Villarreal that we talked about last week. Important breakthroughs do come from scientific rigor. So even as we're talking about all these larger concepts of consciousness and stuff, there is hard science. This is the marriage of hard science and the softer sciences. Dr. Villarreal is doing hard science with a telescope and numbers and computers, and determining, if you recall from last week, that there is good evidence that there are things out in space that were out there long before we had satellites that were circling the Earth and monitoring us. So, that was back in the 50s. It's my personal belief that that goes well past the 50s, possibly back into time immemorial, possibly thousands of years ago, possibly back to the beginning of humanity showing up on Earth. We have no idea how old this consciousness is, the phenomenon is. We have no idea. So we're just aware of it since the 40s and the 50s. But how long has this been out there? Or how long has it been right here looking at us and monitoring us? And science is doing a good job of putting the numbers to that, I guess I should say. Vince, were you going to say something?
No.
So moving on into this was my last one. This was as I say there, it's my very subjective takeaway. I'm just going to read it because, again, I meant it when I wrote it. So I'm just going to, rather than paraphrase it, it's right there for me to read. One of the most challenging takeaways from the symposium, and the one that's most difficult to articulate, is the sheer breadth of disciplines now drawn toward the phenomenon. These disciplines include physics, military intelligence, consciousness studies, theology, anthropology, and metaphysics, among many others. It's being approached from every angle known to us, from nuts and bolts to artistic interpretation. Yes, there were artists there. There were artists at the Soul Symposium wondering how this all plays into what they do. So I think that's an interesting conversation. Still, no matter how much we bring to the table, conversation about the phenomenon eventually becomes ephemeral, slipping away from language into the mists of pure wonder. Every framework, no matter how exacting, eventually fails to contain it. We are attempting to map the edges of something we cannot even fully name. It is my sense that this conversation may ultimately not be about the phenomenon itself at all. More likely, it may be about us and what kind of consciousness is required to even perceive what's trying to show itself. The phenomenon, whatever it is, doesn't appear to care about intellect or credentials. It doesn't seem to want to be solved or decoded. To me, it feels like it just wants to be acknowledged, witnessed, and respected, revealing more of it to us as we evolve in our ability to comprehend. And this is one of my favorite quotes. The universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to grow sharper. And that's really how I feel. I feel that this is something that it's a mystery to be explored and engaged by us. I don't think it's a mystery to be solved by us. And I think this is my personal takeaway. I think when we come to terms with that, we're going to have a lot more information to deal with on this topic. And by the way, when I say waiting for our wits to grow sharper, by no means do I think we're not intelligent. We just have certain very ingrained ways of looking at things. And the more we expand our ways of looking at things, I think the more we'll be able to grapple with this topic. So that was my last takeaway. And with that, I'm going to take a pause because my voice is going a little bit and ask if anybody has any questions or thoughts, comments.
And let's take a moment with that. This is a nice opportunity. We have about 15 minutes left, and this would be a nice conclusion to the two presentations last week and this week made by John. This is a hugely important time for us. So let's just take some time, try to get some questions formulated, and we'll kind of go from there. Pam, I think you're first up.
John, do you think that the extraterrestrials have given us any new technologies?
I do. I actually do. I think there are things that we probably deal with in our everyday lives. And I think that there are probably things that we don't even know about that have been integrated into our technology. So there's a book. I'll just tell you, there's a book by a guy named Philip Corso, Major Philip Corso. He's not with us anymore. He was a lieutenant in World War II, and the premise of his book is that he claims to have been at the Roswell, shortly after the Roswell crash, and then was involved in a whole program within the government, within his military career, where his job was to take things that had been recovered from crash sites that we didn't know what they were, and they were given to him, and he would take them to companies like Bell Labs or Lockheed Martin and say, hey, we found this on a Russian plane that crashed. We don't know what it is. Can you make sense of it? And, some of the things that he claims, I'm not saying he's right, but that he claimed had something to do with that were things like night vision technology, fiber optics, even Kevlar, and what we have is not by any means what was found. It's just the most basic approximation, what they could make sense of. But I think, I feel that we have been, even more than from crash sites, such as they are, I believe that, and this is a personal belief, so don't, this is just my personal belief. I believe that there's been some coordination with the phenomenon, with these entities, and that they have shared technology with us. And it may be in things that we don't even know, like computers, like artificial intelligence, like circuitry. Those things, it's really interesting that those things all happened shortly after World War II. Now, you could say we were already on an accelerated scientific path, perhaps because of the Manhattan Project. But I tend to think that maybe it was something else. And I think maybe some of that came from otherworldly places. Speculation, but that's my speculation.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
John Hoops.
Thank you, John, for all you've done, first of all. Boy, you've got me immersed. I'm immersed in now creation classes. And not only that, the energy that it puts out. So I want to thank you. And you said something that really struck me when you said, if you see a good movie, if you see a movie and it's with you 2 days later, it's probably a good movie. And that happens just about every day in our classes. When with something really good and it's presented really good, those stay with us. So I think there's a nice theme there. And obviously you are passionate about this. It's a proclivity, I would say. And it's so nice to have somebody of your caliber willing to do all this work and so happy to share it. Yeah. So that's my comment. Yeah. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, John. Thank you.
Yeah.
And you know, and again, I know I've said this, but it's worth repeating. You know, thanks to Vince for having the vision to, you know, be open to this idea and to bring this into our conversation. So thank you, Vince.
You're welcome. John, you had a concluding statement. I think we went over pretty much everything, except maybe the last paragraph, that these talks will be available on YouTube. Maybe you might just want to mention that a little bit.
Yes, you're talking about the soul videos.
Yes, yeah. Soul videos.
Right. So they've done this for the past 2 years, and I expect that they'll probably do it in a little quicker fashion than they did it last year. But the videos, each of the presentations will be on the Soul YouTube website within weeks. I don't know when. I'll probably get a notification because I'm in a chat group from Soul, and they give all these notifications. As soon as I get the notification that they're out, I will let you know. What they typically do is they roll 2 or 3 of them out at a time, so it's not like a data dump. I would say they're all very good. They're all excellent. Maybe in some other forum, I'll give you maybe a few of my favorites and maybe Vince some of your favorites, but they're all worth watching. But as soon as they're available, I will let you know. And you don't have to wait, really, because Soul 2023 and Soul 2024 are all out on the website, and they're worth watching. That it's not like they've expired or it's old information. They're really still relevant. So I would encourage you to go back to their website, their YouTube channel, and check those out too. I mean, each session was about 35 or 40 minutes long, so it's not like a long commitment. And they're well worth watching. They're all worth watching.
That was interesting. Each segment was no more than 45 minutes. That's very interesting. They didn't go on and on. It was like, let's get it all together in 45 minutes. That was helpful. Any other questions or comments, though? Karen. And then back to Pam. Karen?
Actually, just a comment for the feel of that last sentence in your quote, or that last paragraph in the quote, that to me it was I don't know, I hope I can explain this well, a very truly spiritual summary of it all. You know, that I had a sense of, you know, as we've learned that, we learn that we observe and experience, and that we're here creating and learning, expanding, assisting others, that, maybe that's, just another, extension of Source that's doing the same thing on maybe even a grander level, that, we talk about that quantum, from the very smallest to the very largest, this repeating, experiencing, observing, creating, learning, expanding, and assisting when you can, not trying to control or anything, but just being of assistance. I get a feel for all of that in your paragraph. And I don't know if that was explained well or not, or if you sense that.
The speaker. Come on, sorry.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Karen. It is a spiritual experience for me. Honestly, I think we all touch the spiritual in different ways. I truly believe that this is as much as, again, it's a nuts and bolts thing, but that's just a manifestation of it. I believe this is a consciousness-based event that we're experiencing that is dialoguing with us in ways that maybe we don't understand yet, but that's kind of the point. It's kind of beckoning us forward, in weird and strange ways, but still very meaningful ways. I certainly don't think it's just some entity trying to be clever with us. I think that there is deep and profound meaning in this. And when we get quiet and try and pay attention to it, you kind of get this sense of like, oh my gosh, this is so big and I'm part of it. And it is a spiritual experience for me. So thank you for recognizing that.
Thank you, Karen. Pam, and unmute Pam first.
John, do you think that our government already has much more advanced technologies such as free energy and perhaps a cure for cancer, things like that, that they have it, but they're just not releasing it?
Well, I don't know about the specifics, Pam. I would say, I would say with a high level of certainty.
Yourself on mute with me.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I would say with a high level of certainty, a personal certainty, there is a lot of stuff that is not that we don't know about. And I think, not to come back to this movie, but I think if you watch The Age of Disclosure, you'll get a strong sense of how and why that is probably the case. I don't know about the particulars, cures for cancer, but things like 0-point energy. Yeah, I think we probably at least are aware of it, even if we don't understand how it works.
Thank you, John.
Any other comments anyone would like to make? Okay. What I'd like to do then is, first of all, we're going to conclude this video, and then I'm going to ask everyone else to stay on just for a moment. This concludes the second presentation of the Soul Symposium for 2025. I hope you've enjoyed the presentations. Again, please contact John Shartle if you have any additional information, any other questions you might have that you would like to share with John or receive answers from him. Thank you to all of you for listening. Let's keep going. UAPs, away in the future, a wave in the future. Namaste, dear ones.
Namaste. Thank you.